bad-mouthing Drupal. Welcome, everybody. Day 1, session 2, I believe. So appreciate everyone making it out. Today we're going to talk about data security in Drupal 8 and what Drupal does to protect your data as you enter it in there. So a lot of the questions we normally get is, so what does Drupal 8 do to secure your data? And the answer is, it doesn't. By default, Drupal does not secure your data. It's not a bad thing. It's just that it is not concerned about what you're entering into it. It believes that you know what to do with it. So by default, if you enter in content into a node, or you create a web form and you give people the ability to enter data into that, it's just going to go into the database and be stored there for all to see for all time. And so, luckily for us, Contrib does secure your data. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to kind of walk through some of the modules and some of the steps that you can take to secure your data in Drupal 8 and make sure that if you are collecting information that is private, you know what to do with it and how to handle it best. So this talk is titled Data Security in Drupal 8. And we're going to kind of talk about the various levels of which we can secure our data. So quick introduction for those of you that want to fall asleep. It's early in the morning. I understand there was a pub crawl last night, so just let my baritone voice lull you to sleep. But my name is Chris Deitzel. I'm the founder of Locker and Cellar Door Media. Locker is a secrets management product that we built. Cellar Door Media is a services company that I run. One of my newest things that I can be proud of is I was recently appointed to the Department of Homeland Security's Data Privacy and Integrity Council. And so we are a committee that advises the Department of Homeland Security on privacy issues for initiatives that they're taking, as well as cybersecurity issues that they're dealing with. I've been fortunate enough to work with everything from Fortune 100 companies, large-scale e-commerce. We actually built an entire airlines ticketing system on Drupal Commerce. That was fun. And all the way down to startups. So I've kind of been fortunate enough to span the whole gamut. Been an open source developer for 8 years now, 8 plus, in WordPress and Drupal. And my other claim to fame is I'm technically a third generation tech nerd, dating all the way back to my grandpa who started in computers in the 50s. So the first question you have to ask yourself is, do you know where your data is? And a lot of people think they do. A lot of people get into Drupal and say, oh, I know it's in the database. Where in the database? Do you know where information, once you enter it into the screen, where it's going, where it's traveling through? And it's not just the database. Because Drupal can store things anywhere. It can store it in the database, it can store it in config, which then ends up getting saved to the file system, which most of the time ends up getting put into your Git repo, which now has a living history forever. It can be living in a various number of caches that sit between Drupal and the end user. And a lot of the times what we'll run into is folks are saying, oh, I'm encrypting data at the database. Awesome, what about your caches? Because if you have decrypted data that's sitting in a cache somewhere, that cache is now vulnerable, right? So now you have to think all the different layers between screen to PHP, where is your data being stored? And in Drupal 8 especially, as Drupal has grown up, it has gotten more complex. And it's been shaped into a more enterprise tool, which is great. But that's also spreading where the data is stored. So a lot of the times, you end up trying to figure out, where is my data? And it just turns into this frustrating battle of, I don't know. In the database, everything is default to plain text. In the clear, we call it. And so by default, nothing stored in the database is protected. Sometimes people try to do security through obscurity. And so they'll try to store something in the database and be like, oh, I'm going to encrypt it. And then I'm going to put the key for the encryption in the variables table, which is in the exact same database that the encrypted data is in. And at that point, you've just done some really complex obscurity. The other thing that I love is when people, module maintainers, use the form API, which after developing for Drupal and WordPress and other platforms, I have to say the form API is probably the coolest thing that Drupal does. I don't think we realize just how fortunate we are to have that, because a lot of other platforms, WordPress included, you're literally like echoing form HTML out in your module and then handling everything yourself. And so, but one of the things that the form API does is it gives you the ability to create a password field, which all it does is render an HTML5 password field, which gives you the pretty little dots. What it doesn't do is protect anything that's entered into that password blank once it gets back into the database. So I challenge you, go into your config, go into your variables table, and you will find passwords in the clear, sitting in your config, sitting in your database, because somebody created a form API and didn't handle that in the submit handler to do anything with it. They just said, I'm creating the nice appearance that there's a password protection going on here. Config. Config is awesome. It has saved us many a times in large projects. And if you work in distributed teams, you know the wonders and also the pains of config. But it allows you to synchronize your environment from a lower environment up to production, and also share your configuration with other folks working with you. The problem is, code is forever, especially if it's in your Git repo. Unless you like going back and doing some force pushes and mucking around in the history, once you commit something to config and your config is in the Git repo, it's there forever. And you probably wouldn't be shocked, but you could be shocked. You go on GitHub and you just search things like AWS_API_key, and you'll come up with thousands of repos of people who've committed API keys, tokens, passwords. Everything gets committed to Git. And Drupal, by having config, is one of these that you can fall prey to having secrets leaked into your config. And then the last thing I mentioned is the cache. In a minute here, we'll demo how to encrypt data in Drupal. And one of the things that we've been able to do in Drupal 8 that we weren't able to do in Drupal 7 very well is invalidate caches. And so now we can say, this field has private data on it that we're going to be encrypting, and so don't cache this anywhere. And Drupal 8 is very nice in that it allows you to specifically point out certain pieces of data that you want cached and certain pieces you don't. In Drupal 7, it's like, cache the whole thing or don't cache the whole thing. And so if you end up turning caching off in Drupal 7, you're going to be sacrificing quite a bit of performance in order to increase your security. But sometimes that's the payoff that you have to have. Our recommendation is to encrypt data in Drupal. So the first thing that you have to know about encrypting data in Drupal is that in true Drupal fashion, everything's an API, everything's a framework. And so first thing that we have is the Encrypt Module. It sits at the base. It is purely just the API for encryption. You can call the function encrypt, you call the function decrypt. This is the module that will handle it. The cool thing is that it allows for various profiles to be created. This was something Rick created that Rick here, RL Hawk, is one of the maintainers of Encrypt and worked with us on building a lot of what you're going to see today. And so Rick came up with this idea of encryption profiles, and what it allows you to do is create different profiles for different types of encryption in your system. And so you can encrypt something with one key for fields, you can encrypt something with another key for config, or if you have a custom module that needs some encryption going on, you can split off the config for each of the encryption profiles, and that allows you to, if one is breached, if one key is lost, not all of your data in the entire system is lost. You can kind of segment your encryption. And the other thing it allows for you to do is the rolling of keys via the encryption profile. And so the encryption profile gets tagged along with the information that's encrypted. It doesn't really matter if somebody knows what profile you're using to encrypt something. It just matters if they know the key. And so what that allows us to do is when we save a piece of data into Drupal that's encrypted, we say it was using profile number 1. You can create profile number 2, set it as the default, so anything that calls encrypt is now going to be calling profile number 2. Anything that gets decrypted, we don't look to what's the default, we look to what it was encrypted with. And so what it allows you to do is kind of slowly roll the encryption in your system so you can actually roll your keys and say, you can set policies. Some folks will have policies set for them at the organizational level, or you can set it internally and just say, every 6 months or every 12 months, we're going to roll our encryption key, or every 6 days, however tight you want to get with it. And then your data will just slowly roll over with it, or you can batch your way through it as well. So the Encrypt module sits down at the base. The one thing that the Encrypt module does not do in Drupal 8, which it did in Drupal 7, is it doesn't implement the encryption. You now have to put another module on top of it to implement the encryption. Think of Encrypt module as the routing layer, and then our recommendation is the RealAES module, is actually what does the physical encrypting and decrypting. It does AES 256-bit encryption with HMAX, and it's using the Diffuse PHP library. For those of you that haven't used it, the Diffuse library is awesome. Use that if you're going to be going off and building your own encryption methods. Don't roll your own crypto. It's like the #1 way to get hacked. You're not smarter than everyone else, I'm sorry to say. And so the Diffuse library, the way that I like to describe it is it's AES encryption with the bumpers in the bowling alley. It really keeps you from doing things improperly and allows you to do things properly much easier. And then lastly, the HMAC verifies it's through a hash. It actually verifies that what comes out of the decryption was what went into the encryption, because there are sophisticated attacks that can actually decrypt a value with the original key, but it can inject new information in. So say you have a file that you're encrypting, somebody could sneak a file in that says, no, this is the new PDF, and when it decrypts, it'll actually decrypt, but the HMAC won't verify and say, no, this isn't the value that were put in. Normally it's not a whole file. Sometimes they'll just change a couple bits or try to inject some code in there. So the HMAC is just like an extra layer on top of the encryption to make sure that you validate what's going in and out of the encryption. Great, so now we have Encrypt. We have RealAES actually implementing the encryption. Now you need something to call that, and one of the most simple ways to do it is the field encrypt. In Drupal, everything's an entity, everything has fields. More often than not, what you're going to be encrypting is a field of data that's on an entity somewhere. And so the field encrypt module allows you to simply just click a button in the config, which we'll see here in a minute, and encrypt data. It's a complete rewrite of the D7 version, so if you did use field encrypt for D7, please try a field encrypt for D8. It's wildly different. And the main thing it does better is cache handling. In Drupal 7, it wasn't the module, it was more of the system. Really hamstrung on how encryption caching, or field encrypt handled caching. Now it's a bit better at that. We've got encrypt, we've got field encrypt, we've got RealAES, we're ready to encrypt. Now we need to put a key somewhere. In Drupal 7, keys were managed by the Encrypt module. In Drupal 8, again, everything's a framework. We kind of split it all apart so that you can use each piece independently. And so we've created the key module. And centralized key management gives site builders the ownership of their secrets. And so our hope and our thought with the key module is that it allows you to centralize where your secrets are stored so that you can just go to one place and see all of your passwords. You go to one place and you can see all of your API tokens, all of your encryption keys. They all live in one spot, rather than it's in a config form here, it's in an admin form there. I have no idea where the hell it's stored over here. Like, things can be spread all out. By centralizing it, you actually allow yourself to be more secure and know what's in your system. Now, a lot of the times, key gets put into config. Like I mentioned earlier with the form API, that will go into config, and then your config gets committed to Git, and now your keys are in Git for history. So don't do it. And that's part of the reason why we created the key module, is that it allows you to have plugins of where you want to store your keys outside of config, so that your config just stores a reference that points to, the key module has this. And so now you can create a module that has an API token, and that API token in config can just say, go talk to config, or go talk to key, and the machine name is this. And that's what gets stored off in config. And then key handles where to put the information. And so one of the cool things with config is they're going through a new config 2.0 initiative, and with config split, now there's introducing the idea of having a config for every environment. That's awesome if you're using the key module, because now with the key module, you can then start having a key for dev and a key for prod. How many people have mistakenly done something in dev with a production API key? Raise your hand. We've all done it. I've lost $70,000 because of it. Not me personally, but we had, when we built the airline system, one of our devs forgot to switch the API key from prod to dev, and as he was testing, he booked an entire airplane full of test tickets for himself, which then flew an empty plane. You can imagine how happy airlines are when they have an entire airplane filled with one person's ticket and nobody shows up. So that was a fun customer call. So config split helps you with that now. The config 2.0 initiative will help you with that later, in allowing you to set different config for different environments. Mix that with the key module, and now you can set different keys for different environments, and the config can change in between those. This is where I enter a shameless plug for Locker. Our system plugs into the key module and allows you to store things away from Drupal. So now we get to go to the point that everyone loves to laugh and point. But we are actually going to create our site here. So we're going to call it Badcap Demo. I'll just say info@locker.io. We're going to give it the super secret admin, admin, admin. This is a local site, so none of you guys can hack it. I don't want to get the annoying emails. And we're off. So this is a fresh Drupal site, literally installed as you saw earlier, as I was walking in the door. Hosted locally with Lando. Shameless plug for Lando. Go use it, folks. It's awesome. But this is brand new, fresh, not even using new mommy. Back to the Bartik here. And so we're just going to go in and turn on all the modules that I just discussed. I'm going to actually run you through a demo of what encryption looks like and how to do this. Real quick, for those of you that have done encryption in other systems, I feel your pain. Know that the reason why we've done all the work we've done over the past 5 years is to get to the point where I can do this demo comfortably on a fresh install of Drupal in front of a lot of people. Normally, installing encryption into a system and trying to get something to encrypt is a days, if not weeks, process. You got to set up all the various places. You got to set up all the various pieces. It's not easy. So we're going to go in, encrypt, field encrypt, AES, and then for our keys, we're going to install key and locker. I've run through this a couple times, so I know nothing's going to blow up on me. Yes?
Make your screen bigger for the back of the room.
Yeah, let's see if I can do that here. So while this is installing, I do need to, I'm going to have to do a quick little configuration with Locker so that we can do that. One of the things, the reason why I'm installing Locker on this and doing the demo, it's not to do a product plug. It's because Locker, we provide the ability to create encryption keys on the fly. So if you don't have an encryption key, we'll create one for you. It's just easier to turn that on and do that rather than trying to build my own 256-bit encryption key. So our modules have been installed. It's a pain going through the system when you have to click on 5 different things here rather than having our quick little drop downs. So I am just going to add in where our let's see here, text edit. So this just tells it where the connection files for Locker are located. And now, luckily, we're all registered here. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go create a key. We're going to go to config. So we'll start at the key level. We're going to add a key. We're going to call this our bad camp demo encrypt key. So the key module gives you the ability to do different types of keys. We've just started doing multi-value for authentication, so you can actually put in like key pairs and do various fun things like that. You got user password, which obviously is a user password pair. Authentication is basically any string that you want to store. We just call it authentication. Encryption, and then locker encryption, which just creates it for you. One of the nice things about having key types is that the key module will actually do some basic checking on the key when it's created. So if you're using an encryption key and you say it's a 256-bit key and you put in a 128-bit key, it's going to go, no, that's 128 bits. You told me it's 256. Go try that again. So again, the whole idea here is put as many bumpers on the system as we can. Provider settings, so this is where you can choose where your keys are stored. Out of the box, we have config, bad, but good for dev. And then file, which allows you to place some sort of text file somewhere, and then we'll read that text file. And then locker, of course, stores it away from you, and then you can choose whether or not to have the value displayed to. So what I'm doing now is I'm creating a 256-bit encryption key. It's going to be stored in locker, offsite, and away from everything. One of the cool things that Rick worked on that I think is kind of the game changer for key is this overrides right here. One of the awesome things about Drupal 8 is that you can have config and then you can have config overrides. And so with config overrides, we in key can override any config that sits elsewhere in the system and say, nope, that's not the real config, this is our config. So real quick here, if this was an authentication key, say an AWS token, a MailChimp API key, or anything like that, we could go in and create a config override name, and then go through and actually like dive through our config settings in the entire system, pull out a value, drop it into key and say key is now going to override this value and take it over, and then it'll actually clear the overridden value in the config so that that doesn't get stored off. What that allows you to do is take an AWS API key, you can store it in key, you can then let the key module override it, and as a module maintainer, you don't even have to know that key exists. Key can override it. Now, we do provide APIs in key to let you integrate your module directly with it, but this is kind of the game changer in that you now don't have to wait for your module to know about the key module. You can install the key module and override anything in your system you want. So back to encryption. We've got our encryption key. So now we're going to go out and create an encryption profile. And so we're just going to create a label for it and call it bad camp encrypt. The encryption method, these are all the modules that are in the system that are installed. If you haven't installed RealAES, this will be blank. It's the number one question we have is, why aren't there any encryption methods? It's because you haven't installed the module. So we picked that. One of the cool things that it does is because we know key types, it goes to the key module and says, just give me encryption keys. I don't care about authentication keys. I don't care about anything else. I just want encryption keys, because it knows that the key module has already done the validation on that key to make sure that it's the right length and everything's checked out there. So it'll go through. Obviously, we only have one encryption key in the system, and it will save that off. It's now the default. Anybody that calls encrypt is going to be using our default here. So first things first, I'm going to go create a piece of content here. I'm just going to go in and say word system, don't worry, this is a test. And so just like anything else in Drupal, we've saved a piece of content. Now if we come out to our database, and this is for folks in the back, I don't know if this is going to expand on me here or not. No. So I'll just kind of walk you through here. Where are we at here? So if we go into our node body field, we're going to see that our body value is, don't worry, this is a test. In clear text in the database. Imagine this being a, if you work at a university like this, a student profile that has personal information on it. That field is stored in the clear in the database. We don't like that. We want to change that. So we come up to structure. We go to our content types and manage the fields on our article. We go to the body field and we edit it. And we go to field settings. And now you got a whole bunch of warnings here, but basically changing field encryption after you've already done stuff in the database is going to screw things up. So just be warned. But we go in and say, I want to encrypt this field. One of the nice things with Drupal 8 is we now have different properties of that field, and we can actually encrypt the properties of the field as well. So if your field is a custom field type that has something protected in it, it can actually encrypt those values that are properties that are columns in the database that normally aren't surfaced when you just encrypt the basic stuff. So we're going to encrypt the text and the summary, and we're going to be using the encryption profile. It just defaults to our default profile. And then the other piece here is we've marked don't cache it. So this will make sure that this does not hit the cache as it goes out through the system. So we're going to save those field settings, and we're going to go back to our content here. And so we're going to go back and edit this presidential alert system test and say, this is encrypted. And so we save it. So now it's calling the encrypt module. The encrypt module is saying, I need the key from key. It goes to key. Key says, I need the key from locker. It goes to locker, grabs the key, comes back. Now encrypt says, I got you the key. I'm going to go to the encrypt profile, RealAES, take the packet along with me, encrypt it, do all that fun stuff, and come back with it. Pretty simple. Now, if we come back to our database and refresh, you'll see that the body value now just says encrypted. You don't need to know about anything here. Nothing to see. This is encrypted. Now up here in encrypted field data, we have node 1 body value is giant blob of encrypted data. So now we've taken that data, we've encrypted it, and stored it away. Now your databases are clean and clear of all the private data that it used to contain. Live demo gone well. Yes?
Maybe a stupid question, but...
There is none.
So if I was maybe going to write a query or add to a view or something...
That's where encrypting sucks. So once you encrypt the value, it's gone, right?
Okay.
There's no getting it back, which now means that you're right. In views, you can't query, find me a string that looks like this is the presidential test, because that doesn't say presidential test. That says, right? So yes, you do lose some querying capabilities. There are ways to do advanced queries like that if you want to run your own. You can create a separate hash table of the information, and then like a password, you do a hash, and then you're looking for like whole key searches, right? So this is more like, I've worked with a university client that did their registration forms in web form and wanted to encrypt the social security number in there. Not saying that I recommend that for anybody, but if that's what you end up having to do, you have to do it. You're going to say, I need to search somebody with certain social security number. If it's always formatted that way, you can create a separate hash table, match the hashes, and then find the node off of that. But yes, you do lose some queryability to the data, which is never fun. Any other questions on the live demo before I hop back? I'm more than happy to answer. All right. That went well. So, putting it all back together. First things first, if you don't need it, don't collect it. These are all the layers that we go through. We call defense in depth. You've got your device, you got your application, computer, network, your physical, your policies, your procedures. You've got all these different layers, all these different places where data can be stored. If you don't need it, don't collect it. If you're just getting somebody's social security number because you might need it in the future, don't. If you're collecting a credit card number, don't. And this is where we have to do yes, there is GDPR out there. We are now under regulations that state that we can and cannot store certain data and what we can do with that data. And folks from California, in the lovely state of California, you guys have CCPA, which is the California Consumer Privacy Act, which is basically California's GDPR, which will be coming into play in 2020. So if you haven't started thinking about it yet, you got a year and a half to do it. Start now, don't start in a year. But basically, you're now going to be under privacy policies similar to those of GDPR. If you're not in California, sucks to be you. You still have to follow this because chances are you have somebody accessing your website from California, or your servers are in California, or there's software in California. So that's part of the reason why the California legislator did it, is they said, well, the US government can't even tie its own shoe at the current moment, so we're going to go and do it ourselves. But in true US bravado, the federal government doesn't like the states telling the federal what to do, and so now the federal government is looking at putting in its own data privacy and protection acts that could supersede CCPA. All that to say, there's a lot of privacy work going on. So now you have to start thinking about, what is the information that I'm pulling into my site? Where is it going? How is it going to be there? How long is it going to be there? When do I delete it? Who do I delete it for, and how? We can't just, rogue go kind of Wild West on this. There are some unique solutions that are being created for privacy situations like that. One of which is what I just demoed, encryption. If you look at GDPR and CCPA and a lot of the other proposals, China has its own privacy policy. Russia has its own privacy policy for privacy legislation. Yes, there are a lot of countries out there that do have their own privacy legislations. A lot of them say that you need to anonymize or somehow scrub the data or make it non-identifiable. Guess what? Encryption is a great way to do that. Once you encrypt a piece of data, it's gone, right? You can't get it back. So it's a great way to anonymize that data or protect it. Another thing about encryption is that if you delete the key, you delete the information. Because one of my fun facts is it will take all of the energy that we've ever output from the sun, put into the largest supercomputer that we've ever known, for longer than the period of history that we know that exists, to go through half of the possibilities for the 256-bit key that I just created. So literally, you cannot crack an encryption key. If you can, come talk to me later. I want to know about the future. But it just doesn't happen until yes, somebody's going to raise their hand and say, what about quantum computing? Yes, we have to go through quantum safe protocols. Quantum computing isn't even there yet, so don't worry about it. And by the time quantum computing comes to place, nobody's going to want the information that you have right now anyway. So, but by deleting that key, you can cryptographically delete the data. And so it's one way that you can sit there and say, I don't want this data anymore. Rather than going through and creating all these crazy deletion policies and how are we going to delete data where it's at, just delete the key. It's gone. All the information that was encrypted with that is now gone. If you can provably delete the key. So let's go through some real world uses. E-commerce. We run into this one a lot. PCI is very clear on what you can and what you cannot do. How many folks take credit card information in the room? Okay. How many of you guys are using tokenized payment systems like Stripe and PayPal and all those? Good on you. Because if you're trying to do your own payment system where you're pulling in the credit card information and the CVV and the expiration date, I'm seeing some shaking heads in the room. Don't do it. Really bad stuff. Chances are you're violating PCI and you will get blacklisted. You will never process a credit card again in your life, and we're all going to point and laugh at you. And so if you are doing something that's under PCI, PCI now states that keys need to be managed in an external environment. Guess what? That external environment doesn't include the KMS that sits on the same cloud infrastructure that you have. So a lot of folks say, well, I'm on AWS and I use KMS. If the same access tokens that get you into your cloud also get you into your key manager, guess what? It's not an external environment. It's just a separate computer in the same environment. So PCI is actually catching up to the game now and saying what you can and what you can't do. And I always like to tell folks, unless you have a budget the size of Amazon, don't touch credit card data, because chances are you're going to do it wrong. Tokenized systems out there now allow the card to be posted directly to the payment provider. The payment provider will give you back a token, and then all you're doing is passing a token back and forth through your system. Your systems never even touch or can touch credit card data. And that's the way to do it. Every single method or every single payment provider out there now has tokenized systems. Even Authorize.net, which was kind of the last one to hop on the bandwagon. But they now do it. But in kind of true security through obscurity fashion, as you're putting these layers in place, now your API tokens become much more valuable secrets, because those API tokens are accessing the payment systems that have the credit card data on it, that have the ability to charge, refund, and do some nasty things. And most of the time, it's also storing private data, addresses, everything else about the user. So protect those API tokens with the key module. Enterprises. Who works in enterprise? Big business. A couple folks. This is where it gets fun. Enterprise data protection isn't just about encrypting the user data. There was a hack not too long ago, a few years back, where there was a website that was publishing press releases for quarterly earning reports on behalf of large publicly traded companies. Hackers got in, they were able to read the unpublished nodes, and were able to know whether or not somebody was meeting their quarterly earning reports, and were able to front run the market on that. They made about $80 million until they started bragging about it on Twitter and got arrested. So this is where I hit the mute button and say, if you're going to do this, don't brag about it on Twitter.
Yeah, right.
But if you're an enterprise, a lot of the times we work with an enterprise client, and I was just in an office on Wednesday, and they go, oh, we don't have any personal data on this website. I go, great, do you have press releases? They go, well, yeah. I go, are you a publicly traded company? Yeah. So if somebody got that press release that you missed your quarterly earnings report early, not only could they front run the market, but that's an SEC violation on your part, and you're now under, like, you got jail time looking at you, right? Like, we're going into some serious matters here. So enterprise data protection isn't just, oh, I'm not collecting personal data, I'm not collecting credit cards. Think about press releases and market driving data, or market moving data, as I like to call it. And so the other thing that we also have been running into lately is IP. Protect your IP and then digitally sign it with encryption so that nobody can, like, swap out a schematic and all of a sudden the secret recipe to Coke now is using real sugar instead of corn syrup and everyone's happy. Protect it, digitally sign it so that everyone keeps using their corn syrup. Educational. We're at Berkeley, a lot of educational folks here. Some. Actually, not as many as I thought. Congratulations, you've got all of these to worry about, because not only do you have enterprise and you're dealing with state information and information that may be tied to governmental, you've got health services on campus, so you're under HIPAA. You've got payment providers and bookstores, so you're under PCI. You are also under FERPA, because you probably have some folks on campus that are under the age of 18, right? So you've got all of these different regulations and concerns to worry about. So educational data protection is no joke. You've got a lot to worry about. But luckily, because a lot of educational sites use Drupal, we've got some tools to use. And the other thing to think about is SAML and federated logins that a lot of the universities use. That all relies on an encryption backbone, and that relies on keys. And so you need to protect those keys, otherwise somebody can infiltrate your single sign-on system, log in, and all of a sudden have access to your student data. So this is a new slide. I added it this morning. Yesterday, I officially put in the ticket for Core Privacy Initiative. So this is a shameless plug for that. Would really appreciate your support. What we're proposing is that we actually take some of these privacy measures that have been happening in Contrib and move them into core, providing core with the ability to know and identify to site builders what private information is out there, what fields are on the user that you may want to have. If you're under GDPR, are there user requests that are there? We're taking a lot of keys from the WordPress community. They are way ahead of us in the privacy world. They actually have privacy in core. And one of the cool things that they have is they allow plugins to declare to the core framework, this is the data that I'm collecting and sending to a third party, Cambridge Analytica. We are allowing plugins now to declare into core, this is the data that I'm going to be siphoning off of your users and sending to somebody else. And that now can be compiled into a single screen in core, where you can then either build a privacy policy off of it or use it to inform your privacy policy. So all of a sudden, somebody in the marketing department installs a plugin that you don't know about that's siphoning data off to a third party, you now have a centralized place for that. Things like that. We're trying to get those into core and make core more privacy aware, because regulations aren't going to be going away. They're only going to be getting stricter. And as long as we aren't playing on the same field as the regulations, we're always going to be trailing it. We're always going to be trying to catch it. So we might as well step up and actually be proactive in that. Along with that, we're working on creating an open web privacy working group. So we're talking to the leads of the core privacy team in WordPress, hopefully the core initiative that gets built out of Drupal. We actually talked with Joomla in Darmstadt about this as well. And we're working on building a consortium of folks that are in the open web to state and kind of declare, these are our levels of privacy that we're going to have. These are the levels of privacy that we're going to hold our projects to. And with it, we can move 30, 40, 50% of the web to a certain standard of privacy that we don't even have to worry about regulations. We can do it ourselves. So come help if you're a privacy advocate or you're a security advocate and you want to be involved. Please come get involved. There's plenty of places for it. This battle is just starting. So with that, securing data is your responsibility and nobody else's. If you're writing the code, if you're building the site, it's your job to know how to build the systems that people are going to use. And it's your job to know where that data is. And the last thing is we always say is, clients may not ask for this. They may not ask, hey, can you encrypt that field on that thing? They expect you to know. You're the nerd in the room that they hired. They're paying the big bucks. They expect you to know how to do this. So go out and do it on their behalf rather than on their request. So with that, I'll open it up for any questions. I'm kind of like scooting right in on my time here. So, yeah?
So for encrypting entity information, there's a lot of caching layers for, like a loaded entity is cached, so it's faster than
Yep.
the load, the render layer. So there's tools that ensure that information isn't stored in those caches in the United States.
So in my live, I've done this talk once before, and in the live demo, I had XJam and a few of the security team folks in, and we were actually like, same question came up, and we were like live going through the caches, and I was like sweating bullets of like, yeah, no, it works, and we're like, does it really work? Come to find out it does. Yes, so the field encrypt module does have that little box that says uncache this, and it will make sure that as that field is rendered, and as long as that entity, as long as a cache is respecting the caching rules that the entity declares to it, it won't cache that entity out. But yes, caching is one of those things where I think it was even Twitter had their access logs. Oops, all of the passwords that people were submitting to us were in the access logs because we just logged what was getting sent to us, not thinking that the passwords were actually in the clear being sent to us. So caches, logs, all of those are great places to look. There are tools, and a lot of the tools that we're building around Encrypt try to take care of that, but I can't claim that it's 100% because there are caches out there that may be sitting in front, like a varnish or something like that, that's going to cache that fully rendered entity or that fully rendered page outside of Drupal. So it is something that you need to be aware of and write your own caching rules to make sure that if somebody's logged in, don't cache it. If somebody is, if it's an internal site, so it's an anonymous page, and you have encrypted data on there, make sure that Varnish knows what sections of the site to cache and whatnot.
Can you talk about performance, especially with respect to retrieving keys from, or retrieving, from offsite?
Yeah, so that is one of the big things that we've been focusing on because luckily now encryption itself is not that performance heavy. It still does add a little bit of lag to it, but it's not a ton. The lag of going offsite and coming back is real. Can't say that it's not. In Locker, we track it like hawks because we want to make sure that the system stays performant. Right now, we average about 150-ish milliseconds in our system to round trip something. So then it's just a matter of how far you are away from us. So say 150 to anywhere to 200 milliseconds likely. So a slow database query. One of the nice things is the key module does save the key in memory for the bootstrap so that anytime you do have to go offsite to get something, no matter where it is, whether it's in your, you can, I believe there actually are KMS plugins for key now. There's Vault plugins. There's folks that are doing other things as well. It's not just Locker or bust. But once you go offsite, you grab it. You've paid that penalty of going offsite, and you come back. It will store it for the bootstrap and then do all the operations off of it there. So if you have 100 encryption operations that need to occur, it's going to go retrieve the key once, run it 100 times, and then ditch it out of memory at the end. So we try to keep it as performant as possible. We are releasing an update to Locker here pretty soon, and our internal clocking on that is sub 100 milliseconds internally. So we're really trying to push this shouldn't be anything faster than a database query. So, yeah, we did have somebody using Locker, and they came to us, they're like, it's taken 7 seconds to load my page. Well, they were storing like 10 or 15 keys in our system that each had to be retrieved individually and then go out and do their own individual things. So in that scenario, we said, put all those in a serialized array, encrypt the array, and store the encryption key in Locker. And then all of a sudden, they went from 7 seconds back to 1 second because they had to do less round trips. So there are ways around it that you can kind of just push things around and make it so that it stays performant. But in reality, it shouldn't add that much of a performance lag to what you're doing. And if you're encrypting something, chances are you want that extra 100 milliseconds. The person isn't going to matter waiting for that. So, yes?
If my CISO leaves your position, do I need to worry about changing keys, and is there an elegant way of doing that other than killing them?
Changing keys? For encryption or just for tokens in general? One of the things that, the reason why we recommend offsite key management is that by not keeping the keys in config or around where developers can have them, if you have a developer leave, they don't leave with all your keys, and you're just sitting there rolling your keys constantly every time a developer comes in or out of the doors. So yes, you do need to roll your keys if you expect that it's been breached. If you think that it's in a scenario where it's could potentially have been lost. For encryption, normally 6 to 12 months is what we see. Folks rolling their keys every 6 to 12 months, and that can just be enabling a new profile and letting the system roll itself, right? So as the data is accessed, it'll be decrypted with the old key and then re-encrypted with the new key. So you can do that. It's kind of up to your privacy policy or up to your internal policies. I've seen folks that do it on a 24-hour basis where they're like, we're rolling keys every 24 hours, and this thing, if you hack into our system, you got 24 hours to do whatever you want before you're locked back out of it. If you're in a high security environment, obviously do something like that. And there are ways to do, I know Vault has a really cool system of like temporary keys that will actually store the API key, give you a temporary key to access the API key, and that key itself may have like a 5-minute lifespan on it, so that it's just like very dynamically accessing secrets. So hopefully that helps. Really, it's kind of up to whatever you have and whatever your policies are, but definitely be rolling your keys on a regular basis to make sure that inadvertently lost keys, or especially if a developer walks out of the door, a lot of the times breaches and security incidents are internal, they're not external. So it's somebody internally that is disgruntled and leaves, is disgruntled and stays, or their laptop gets stolen or something like that. Anybody else real quick? I think we're over time. Come find me. I'll be wandering around all day and all night. So thank you for coming.